Welcome to Chapter 4, and tonight we are going to be talking about task analysis. Is one of the most important things we're going to cover in terms of instructional design. The agenda for this lecture will be focused all on task analysis. We'll start with the purpose and function, what it is, when it's used, why it's used. We're going to look at three techniques for doing a task analysis. That's the topical analysis, a procedure analysis, and critical incident. We'll actually do an example, so get your pen and pencil ready because you'll have a little activity to do. And then we're going to talk about actually conducting a task analysis. The purpose and function of a task analysis, as I said already, is the most critical step in the instructional design process. It is a collection of procedures defining the content of the instructional unit. What does that mean? Basically, a task analysis goes through a process or a procedure that collects all the information, um, the knowledge, the steps, the concepts, the instructions, everything that you need to know that actually defines the content of the instructional unit. When you get done with the task analysis, you will know what content you need to cover. The task analysis solves three problems for the designer. First of all, it defines the content required to resolve the performance problem. So based on whatever the performance gap is, such as in the case where we looked at Quigmar Electronics, people were new hires. We needed a training course for the new hires in the case. It defines what content that has to have in order to resolve the performance problem. It allows the subtle steps to be identified as the SMEs, and remember the SMEs are subject matter experts, has to walk through each individual step of the process or the procedure that you're doing. So you get to see each and every step they're doing, even though they might do it so much that they don't even know that they're doing certain steps. And finally, it allows the designer the opportunity to view the content from the learner's point of view. And this is very important when it comes to making the instructional materials and understanding what needs to get done. So the task analysis solves three problems. It defines the content required, allows the subtle steps to be identified, and allows the designer the opportunity to view the content from the learner's point of view. The uses of the task analysis is the foundation. It uses as the foundation the goal and needs analysis that you've done. The goal analysis is important because it puts a framework around what's being asked for. What does the client want? What do the learners need to know? And the needs analysis tells you where the learners are at so you know when to start. And it is so important because here's some examples. What are stars? Now, depending on the goal of the instructional unit and the learners, you could talk about stars at like a second grade level in terms that they're lights in the sky, they're planets, they, reflect the light of the moon, very simple concepts. But if you're actually taking a astrophysics course in college, they're going to talk about stars much differently. So the same title of the course, What are Stars? The goals are very different as well as the learners are very different. So where you start and the terms that you use and the way you present it's going to be different. Same as taking care of a wound. Is this for mothers of small children where you're just going to tell them, have hydrogen peroxide and neosporin and band-aids and, when to go to the doctor and when not to go to the doctor, that type of stuff? Or is this for a nursing student who needs to know about all the different types of bacteria and medicine and how to stitch wounds and how to bandage wounds? Again, depending on what the goal of the course is, what do you want the learner to be able to do or know, really is going to determine the scope of the instruction. And the task analysis is where you actually get the content. You pull the goal in from the goal analysis, and you pull in the learner characteristics from the needs assessment and the learner analysis, and then you use that as the framework to get the content through the task analysis. Okay? The output of the task analysis is the documentation of the content to be included in the instructional materials. So, once you have your task analysis, you typically have a pretty thorough outline or documentation of steps or concepts, and that is the documentation that you use to build your instructional materials. Now, the use of SMEs, or your subject matter experts, is very important. There's two different types of SMEs. You can have an external SME, meaning somebody who's not yourself, or you can serve as your own SME. Now, there's benefits with each of these. External SMEs are good because they know the content probably in an area that you don't, and so they can give you the detailed information. And serving as your own SME has some benefits because you're already knowledgeable about the subject matter. A little bit more about serving as your own SME before we move on to the content structures that is on the screen. Serving as your own SME has a couple of key benefits. One, you don't have to worry about scheduling a meeting because you're always with yourself and you really know the content. The problem with serving as your own SME is that you really know the content, and often you'll forget steps or just assume things, where if it's something outside your range of understanding and you're watching another person do it, you can actually see all the different steps. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we're actually conducting the needs assessment or the task analysis at the end. But when we look at task analysis, there's 6 different content structures. When you're looking at tasks, they're going to be one of 6 different things. They're either going to be a fact, a concept, it's going to be a principle or rule, a procedure, an interpersonal skill, or an attitude. These are the things that you're going to be documenting to include in your instruction. Not all instruction will have all 6, most won't. Some might have just 1 or 2, some might have 3 or 4. But these are the 6 types of content structures, and you should know what they are. Fact is just a fact. It's an arbitrary association between two things. The speed limit in Illinois is 55 miles an hour. It's a simple fact. Okay? That's it. Speed limit 55. It's also facts are usually the vocabulary of the topic. What does that mean? If you're talking about stars, again, you might talk about gases or the reflection or size, different things like that. There'll be different facts that you have that make up what people understand about the concept or the topic at hand. And it's important that they have definitions and understand what those facts are. Usually facts are simply memorized, and you have to have that base knowledge before moving on to something else. Concepts, on the other hand, are just categories used for grouping similar ideas, events, or objects. You can talk about different types of cars or automobiles, and then you know that a car typically carries 4 to 6 passengers, has 4 wheels, and cars are different than trucks, and you have these categories for grouping similar ideas. So those are concepts build on facts. Then you have principles and rules, and these describe relationships between two concepts. This is like your I'm trying to think of a good example of rules. A rule in a classroom could be, you know, you come into the classroom, you sit down, and you're quiet. It describes the relationship between the student and the classroom environment. How is a student supposed to act? You can talk about principles and rules in chemistry. If you mix vinegar and baking soda, they explode. So the principle or rule is if you mix it, you'll have a reaction. Procedures, on the other hand, are just an ordered sequence of steps. These are the steps that the learner has to go through to complete a task. Interpersonal skills are nonverbal and verbal skills used to interact with other people. Sometimes in instructional settings, you'll be teaching people interpersonal skills, how to interview, how to do performance evaluations. That type of stuff might be included in things you need to document. The last things are attitudes, and attitudes are predispositions to behavior. They're hard to measure in performances because you know you have to think about what behaviors people do who have that attitude. Like if you wanted an attitude of generosity, what behaviors do people who are generous do? You have to really think in like your goal statement to get that clear. But that is one of the content structures that you might come across. When you're doing a task analysis, there's three techniques depending on the goal of the instruction. If the goal of the instruction is about facts, concepts, principles, more the cognitive type of things like a math course or um, I'm trying to think, how to be a manager type thing, those types of courses that are more cognitive and how you think and act, you're probably going to do a topic analysis, and then you're going to drill down to find the facts, concepts, and principles that you need to use to make up the final instruction. Many times what you're asked to do when you develop instruction are procedural analysis. How do you actually do something? In terms of the case that we did with like wiring electrical boards, that's a procedural analysis. How do you actually wire a board? Now there's facts, concepts, principles that you would include, but the basic thing is procedural. Finally, there's a critical incident method, and that identifies commonalities of various approaches, kind of combines with the other two. And this is where you're looking at what specifically happened in this incident that we can learn from. And we'll talk about each of these in turn. The topic analysis uses outlining heavily. Basically, it's like taking notes in a class. You'll have the SME or somebody talking about what it means to identify which metal needs to be included in a machine. Or, and as the example in the book goes, the differences between nails and screws. And so you keep asking them questions and they keep answering, and you outline their answers and you keep drilling down until you have everything that you need. This allows you to put the content into a structure that's logical and can be understood. You drill down in each area until all the details that are needed are gathered. And then this level of detail is determined based on the skills and knowledge of the learner. Again, if we're going to use the example like the book does about identifying the correct nail or screw to use, you have to have your performances listed so that you know what you're asking. It might be that they can identify screws in different situations, and you'll have to drill down to what types of situations those are, and then how do you make those decisions. And then they might say something about a nail or a screw that, well, what do you mean by that? Then you'll have to flesh out that concept. So it keeps drilling down deeper and deeper until you have an outline that talks about every aspect of that topic that you need to know. Now, one thing to know about when you're doing a topic analysis is that you might get the details in a variety of orders. They might first start talking about, the different situations that you use a screw or a nail. Then they might talk about how you identify different types of screws, and then they might jump to, you know, how nails are made, or different things like that. And you're taking notes as you're learning them, and then afterwards you're massaging those to get them into an order, um, or well, an order is a good word, an order that makes sense, that you might use then to build your instructional materials. Okay, so topic analysis is really getting to the topics. You're typically talking to the SME, asking them questions, maybe doing some reading about reports and stuff, and we'll get to that, the actual details, in a minute. The second one is procedural analysis. This focuses on observable task. It's completed by walking through and documenting each of the steps with the SME. For example, if in the example of the case, we need to create a bit of instruction to teach people how to wire electrical boards, we need to watch a SME create an electrical board. We have to write down every step that he does. And each step you need to think about, what does the learner need to do? What do they need to know to do this step? What cues informs the learner that there's a problem, that the step is done or a different step is needed? A lot of time flow charts are good for this, because you can make yes-no diagrams. Did the wire hold? Yes, no. And then you know how to flow through it. And there's a really good checklist on this on page 86 of your book. It's right in there, section 4.1, I believe, and it gives a really nice outline about how to do a procedural analysis. And let's walk through this a little bit. So here's an example, and I want you to do this. So get out a sheet of paper and a pencil, and I'm going to give you some instructions, and I'm going to see if you come up with the right answer. Okay? And this is going to show you how important steps are, and explaining the steps and using visual cues. Okay? So in example 1, I want you to take your sheet of paper, and I want you to draw a line on it. Okay? Got your line? Now I want you to draw another line. Okay? Now finally, I want you to draw a circle. Okay, very simple, right? 2 lines in a circle. If I was to ask you what you have on your paper, what word does it spell? Odds are it probably doesn't spell anything. You probably have 2 lines in a circle on your page. So if those were the instructions, it's probably not the most specific thing that you want to do. It wouldn't achieve your goal of having you write the word that I want you to do. So now let's do it again. And we'll start over with the second example. What I'd like you to do is get a clean sheet of paper out, typical notebook size, 8.5 by 11 if possible. And then you need to have an ink pen or a pencil. What I want you to do, about 1 inch from the corner, the left-hand corner, I want you to draw a line about 3 inches straight down. The line should be parallel to the edge of the paper. Okay? Once you have that first line that's parallel to the edge of the paper, that's about 3 inches long and about 1 inch down from the top and about 1 inch over from the left margin, I want you to position your pencil close to the left margin, maybe about 1/2 inch in, and about 1 inch below the top of the first line you drew. And I want you to draw a line that's horizontal from left to right, about 1 inch long. So when you draw it across, it'll look like a cross, or a cross, or a T, if you will. Okay? So you have a straight line down, and the second line you're drawing goes across. It's about 1 inch from the top of your line, going right or left to right, about 1 inch long. Now what I'd like you to do is pick up your pencil and move over about an inch, inch and a half from the line that you drew that's parallel to the page, the longer vertical line. And I want you to draw a circle that's about as tall from or about as high as from the bar that crosses to the bottom of that first line. You have a circle there. Now if I was to ask you, what word do you have on the paper? You should be able to say the word to. I've probably given you good enough instructions that you could have drawn a letter T, a vertical line with a horizontal line with a circle next to it, which would be the O. What are your thoughts about this? Hopefully you can see how the instructions were different. We drew 3 lines, two straight lines and a circle in each case. But in the second case, I gave cues as to what you should be seeing. I gave more explicit directions. I gave points where you could check to see if you were doing it right. I talked about the materials that you needed. I had a better understanding of what knowledge you had so I could start at a different level. And hopefully you saw that the cues helped too. What I'd like you to do in your book at the end of chapter 4, they have an example of how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich task analysis, okay? And I'd like you to notice the cues and the detailed listing of the task and instructions. I mean, making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is one of the simplest things in the world to do, right? But not if you have to write down every step. Now, you might say, well, why do you have to write down every step when you're doing a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Well, you probably don't because it's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and the consequences of an error if you did it wrong are probably not great. But if you're building a nuclear reactor or teaching managers how to do job evaluations so that you don't get sued, or different situations that has a higher consequence, then the details become very important. So hopefully you can see how task analysis really gets down to the details, and you're fleshing out these details because then this is what you're going to teach people. So once you have your task analysis, switching to the instructional materials is pretty easy. But before we move on, a little bit about the critical incident method, and then we'll talk about conducting a task analysis. Critical incident methods aren't used very frequently, but they're important to know about. It's a process that contains cognitive and non-observable steps and can be approached in a variety of ways. The history of this technique was in World War II. Pilots were not flying well. They were having a lot of wrecks. They were losing a lot of planes. They were losing a lot of life. And what they wanted to do is figure out how to stop the pilots from crashing. So the process is that the SME focuses and explains the events around a specific incident or incidents. In this case, pilots who were in a crash or had an incident where they almost crashed, they were sat down and they were asked, what were the conditions before, during, and after the incident? What did you do? How did the incident help you reach or prevent you from reaching your goal? They asked the people what was happening in a specific time so they could pull that information out and use those information and those processes or those incidents or those experiences to help teach others how to handle what to do in another situation. Sometimes this is the only way to get to what is happening is by looking at critical incidents. Nuclear reactors go bad. A machine breaks down unexpectedly. You had a employee issue blow up. You go back and look at the critical incidents and see what you can learn. A little bit about working with SMEs. We talked about the 3 types of task analysis: topic, procedural and critical incident, and they all work with SMEs. And we talked about this a little bit earlier about serving as your own SME. There's definite benefits, but there's some cautions that you got to take care of. Like I said, if you're your own SME, you can work at your own pace. You don't have to worry about scheduling a meeting. You're already familiar, so there's not a big learning curve with the topic. But what happens is that if you are your own SME, a lot of times you'll forget steps. You'll oversimplify things, and it can cause some problems. So, tactics for successful design, if you're your own SME, is see if you can find someone else to be the SME. Double check your work with someone else. Okay. Ask someone else to perform and verify the task. If you come up with the list, ask someone else to look them over to make sure they're correct. Have an expert review your analysis. Talk through the analysis with a novice or an expert. All these things will help make sure that you're doing the task analysis correctly. It's very hard sometimes to be your own SME and make sure you get all the information there. When you're gathering data, either working with SMEs or on your own, one of the best places are to interview your SMEs. That's where you're going to get your best data. Talk to somebody who's actually doing this. Request copies of reports, diagrams, pictures, research articles, anything that will help you understand the process and give you a good enough knowledge of what's going on. When you're an instructional designer, you don't have to know the content yourself. That's what the SME's for. But you do have to have at least working knowledge of the jargon that's going on so you can communicate effectively with the SME. So that helps. Then you have records methods. There's lots of ways you can get the materials or the information. When you're working with the SME, you can ask if you can record it, either on a tape recorder or with a digital camera so you can replay it later. You can take copious notes. You can bring somebody else with you to take notes. You can there's all kinds of ways to record the methods or recording methods to get the information down. Most of it deals with a lot of note taking and then capturing stuff visually and audibly on tape so that you can record it later. Okay, so we've talked a lot about task analysis and really paying attention to the level of detail, then working to get it in the order. Pay attention to the cues that you need and working with SMEs. Coming up, you'll actually have an assignment where you'll do a small task analysis. In the case 3, I think you'll be doing a slightly more extensive task analysis. And for your group project, you need to start thinking about who could be your SMEs, what questions you need to ask your SMEs, and information that you can get from them. Hopefully this was enlightening, and I look forward to talking with you at our next lecture. Thank you.